This is the Iron Sharpens Iron Movement, sharing insights into the power of people-centric leading.
Hi, this is Jim, and today we welcome to our tribe the author of the recently published book titled Ubiquitous Relativity, which is about the philosophy designed to enhance our connection to others. He's a West Point graduate and has worked on Wall Street for over 2 decades. This is Ian Weiner. The Iron Sharpens Iron Movement is brought to you by N2 Growth, a leader in executive search, leadership development, and talent management. We find and develop the world's best leaders. Learn more about our practice by visiting us at n2growth.com or click on the link in the show notes of this podcast. Hi, Ian. Welcome to the Iron Sharpens Iron Movement. Our tribe of listeners are very excited to have you here today. And reading your bio before we start this conversation, I think everybody is pretty psyched for what you have to say. So again, welcome to the movement.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the biggest things that I think you're well known for, you've got a new book out, Ubiquitous Relativity, and one of the biggest things it's talking about the connection to the people. And with the Iron Sharpens Iron Movement, that's really what we focus on. We talk about human-centric leading and what are some of those core things that leaders and followers should really think about. And I think you've got a really great perspective on connection with people. So I'd be interested to know, what do you think we've been missing so far in our lives in connecting with our fellow human beings?
So from my perspective, my biggest issue through most of my life has been my quickness to make judgments about everything and everyone and every situation based almost 100% of the time on next to no information. And because of those rash judgments based on the way somebody looks or something they say, I've missed out on connections. So in a sense, there's been an opportunity cost to all these judgments. And a couple of years ago, I started to really spend a lot of time thinking about this because, I was working on this book. I'd had a couple of moments that sort of indicated to me that there was something bigger going on in my life and that I should focus more on how can I connect better with other people. And the first thing that I realized, and this is, a true story, is I was driving in my car. I had just had surgery to repair a deviated septum. And I was sitting at a stoplight with, my finger up my nose, because if anybody's had that surgery, they know that your nose runs quite a bit. And a woman pulled up next to me in the car, right across from me. And, I could sense that she was looking at me, and I turned over and to face her, and she just shook her head in some kind of disgust. And it sort of just clicked at the moment that, all she sees is a guy picking his nose. She doesn't know what I've been through or why I'm doing what I'm doing. And so that moment made me start to think about, like, wow, I do this all day long, all the time. And because of that, there's plenty of people, I'm sure, that I've missed out a chance of connecting with that may have been an incredible, inspiration or an effect on my life, simply because I wasn't willing to ask myself the basic question, which is, what do I not know about this situation? And by doing that now, if I'm able to stop on one judgment a day, it's a home run for me. And so that's my goal. That the book that I wrote, Ubiquitous Relativity, the subtitle is "My Truth is Not the Truth." And really it's just about admitting that just because I think something is the way it should be doesn't mean that that's the way it should be. Just because, the laws of my universe are one way, that doesn't mean that they are the laws of the universe. And so the ability to admit that I don't know much, if anything, about most situations has allowed me to, in specific moments, um, you know, pause for a second and not just write somebody off, out of my life simply because of something I don't understand.
So, how many years ago was it when you had the nose picking incident?
So that was right in the fall of 2016. It was
Hmm.
right before the election. And I remember after the election that so many people I knew started almost bragging about all the people they had to quote unquote unfriend on Facebook because of who
Ugh,
they voted for. And I started to
wow.
think, like, is this really what it's come to? Have we gotten to a point where we can't even ask another person why they thought something or voted for someone? Because to me, I never saw the downside in asking why. Doesn't mean I have to be friends with the person. Doesn't mean anything other than, you know what? Maybe this person has every rational reason to support or think the way they do. And who am I to tell them they're wrong and I'm right?
Right.
Because I know nothing about their universe. I know nothing about where they came from or why they think what they think. Um, and that's not to say I have to ever agree with them, but at least if I have an understanding of why, because if I ask them, then there's a shot I can keep this person in my life. And while we may disagree on things, this could be somebody that in a time of need or vice versa, we could be there for each other. So, that's the kind. It was that kind of stuff that made me realize, like, there's maybe there's an opportunity to share some of the things that have helped me, um, and that's really what the book is about.
So, since that moment and since you became conscious of this, how do you feel? How much has it changed the way that you lead both professionally and personally? How much has it significantly changed from 2016 prior and post that time?
So I would say it's no understatement to say it's pretty much changed everything.
Wow.
Um, but I would say the biggest way to frame it is prior to 2016, I believed without doubt that I had the system. I knew what the system was for success, and either you fit into that system or you didn't. And if you did, you could be wildly successful with me. If you didn't, you weren't going to be successful and you probably weren't going to be a part of the team. And that was it. There was no real room for discussion. There was no real room for sort of any other, I just sort of looked at it like this is the way it is. And I've got to lead this way. And that's how it is. After 2016, in this day and age today, I think the exact opposite.
Wow.
And so for me now, I can set a standard based on how I act, but I can't apply my system and the way I think to every one of my subordinates without knowing anything about what makes them tick and asking them sort of why they think what they think, and trying that way to harness their best skills and develop the system around them. And so that's kind of been the big change for me from a leadership perspective is, I realize now that there were plenty of people that worked for me that if I had approached it differently, probably could have had a lot more success with them.
Hmm.
And that's not to say that did plenty of great things, and a lot of the people that worked for me responded to that kind of stuff and did very well. But there were others that, without a doubt, if I had taken the time to learn more about them and sort of what makes them tick, what's their universe about, that I could have been even more effective.
So, is there a fundamental difference in, or can you explain the difference, I guess, between the way that you view everybody's individual universes and the popular term lately about unconscious bias? Is it the same thing? Are there subtle differences?
I don't know about unconscious bias. What I do know is that I've got a choice with every judgment that comes into my head. I have a choice, right? The judgments happen. I don't think there's a choice in that. I see something, I hear something, I've been so conditioned, I just have my judgment. Now,
Yep.
I can either run with that judgment and let it dictate my behavior, or I can stop and actually question it. And to me, the questioning of a judgment, the questioning of a belief that I've sort of thought was the law my whole life, to question that to me is as heroic and difficult as almost anything else. And so,
Sure.
I use different examples of people, but you know, we have when we have a concept of certain words in our society, and if somebody says hero, we tend to think about police officers or military, etc. But to me, if 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 I were a person who was raised in an environment where I was taught a certain thing about a certain group of people, and that was just the way it was, and I knew of nothing else because I never left that community, well, I got two choices. I can either just assume that that's the way it is, or maybe one day I question it and I say, well, hold
Hmm.
on a second. Have I ever met a person like this? Have I ever spoken to a person like this? Have I ever done any? And if the answer is no, then it's pretty darn heroic to admit to ourselves, like, yeah, maybe I'm wrong, and
Right.
to take that leap of faith to go out and try to connect with people who you ordinarily have been trained or at least conditioned to think is alien or the enemy or whatever that is. That's the way that I look at it. Like, and it applies to every leadership situation people are
Yes,
in,
you bet.
even in,
You bet.
even in the military, right? I mean, to ask oneself why the person on the other side thinks the way they do, um, is a very tough thing to kind of analyze, but it's very worthwhile. And so that's kind of what it's about to me. It's like I don't like these judgments, whatever I see, like it's just in my like that's in my head. It's just the way it is. I think the challenge is questioning ourselves.
So how do you get around the fact that, everybody grows up in their own cultural dynamic, whether it's just from what's being taught in the household, what's being taught in the school system with their peers, what's being taught in the community, regionally, religiously, all of those things. You have all of these factors, right, that are shaping everybody's perspective on the world. And as they start to mature and they start to get out into the workforce, they become adults. What? How do you begin to preach this to start thinking of this alternative concept of everything that they've been taught? Where do you think you start planting these seeds? I guess of going. It's time to question things. Be very careful about the judgments you come in now. Do you believe this is something that we should become more evangelistic about and start preaching the fact that you should question things more than just assume?
Yes, but I think that for me at least, it's really all about kind of finding a way to pause on one judgment a day. Um,
Hmm.
because I believe that if every one of the 7.5 billion people on the planet paused on one judgment a day, we'd have a much different place to live in. But in the book, there's 5 parts. The last part are exercises that I do specifically for this, and one of them is called a comfort zone departure. And so I use the example of um, vegan, eating vegan food, right?
Yeah.
I lived in New York most of my life, never had any interest in vegan food. And if you had said to me, hey, this guy is a vegan, my initial judgment would be that, okay, not so masculine. What's wrong with this guy? Why would isn't what red-blooded American doesn't eat meat? Um,
Right.
those are my initial judgments. Now, had I ever had vegan food? No. Had I ever been to a vegan restaurant? No. Did I even know a vegan? No. But yet here I was, judge and jury, writing this person off. Now, I come out to LA in 2012. My girlfriend, now wife, not a vegan, but we went to a couple of vegan restaurants and had the food, ate it. Some was okay, some was kind of eh.
Right.
And but now, whether or not I ever go back to a vegan restaurant or like the food is irrelevant. But what I can say now is I understand what's on the menu. So if I meet somebody who's a vegan now, my judgment's different. I don't look at them as something kind of weird. I just look at it like, okay, this person likes this or whatever. But now that I've been there, I get it. And so that's what it's about. So what I tell people is find something that you're either too scared to do or you've just never done. And it doesn't have to be jumping out of a plane, right? It could be as
Right.
simple as listening to a different radio station. And in today's kind of world about how polarized we are, which is a different discussion. I think that's a myth. But I tell people if all you do is watch MSNBC all night long, every night, right? I challenge you for 1 week, go watch Fox News and vice versa.
Ha.
After 1 week, you never have to watch Fox News again. But I imagine that after 5 days of watching Fox News, you will at least understand why the person next to you, who you can't stand because they're a supporter of the Republicans or the right wing or whatever it is, at least why they think what they think. And maybe you can learn something possible, but at a minimum, maybe you can just say, okay, this person who I just can't stand, I at least understand like where they get this and okay. And by doing that, we expose ourselves to things that, make us doubt our own thoughts, that challenge us. And so it's everything from, have I ever been to an opera? No. Okay, so why don't I go into my calendar and plan to go to an opera and make an action about it? And by doing that stuff, we just start to expand our universe. And that's what, for me, it's about. The more I've done, the more my universe expands, the more likely I am to connect with other people, the more interests I have in common. And switching that to business, as I've told people, your clients, whatever business you're in, are all different kinds of people with all different kinds of interests.
Sure.
So the more things I've done and tried, the more likely I'm going to have some kind of connection with my clients. And so from a business perspective, there's a real need and reason for this. And on a personal level, clearly there's that as well.
So being uncomfortable should be a bit of the norm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, and because it's very easy, especially today, with the way that the news and our friends and the way kind of the algorithms work on social media, to just get completely walled off to anything that doesn't coexist with what we think.
So Ian, as you were talking, I was kind of reflecting back and thinking about your life and everything. And I know that, you were Division I hockey player, right? So you obviously grew up in an athletic environment to get to that level. West Point grad, where, in the military, it's a very high teaming experience. You had to be exposed a little bit in a team environment, with a diverse group of people. What's the significant difference, or do you believe that was the foundation to finally get your aha moment of 2016, to by dealing with teams and the diversity of people on it, and a group of diverse people trying to achieve a common goal? Is there a relation there? Do you draw it all the way back to that?
So what I learned, and it took years to learn, when I got to Wall Street, is that at a place like West Point or the military or a hockey team, when the motivation is an ethos, when the motivation is a group sort of conscious, that is completely different than when the motivation is money. And being part of a team at West Point, or playing hockey, um, while people were diverse, there was a one united goal: win the game, win the battle, take the hill, whatever it is. Um, on Wall Street, none of that. On Wall Street, people largely, not everyone, but most people that I managed and worked with were interested in making money. It wasn't that people walked around with pride about what jersey or what gym bag they were carrying, whether it was Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan or whatever it was. That wasn't, as much as corporations preach that, and some do it better than others. On Wall Street, it just wasn't what I saw, at least. Wall Street was about how can I make money for the firm, and by extension make a lot of money for myself, and that's fine. But as far as trying to team build, that's not a terrific way of going. So that to me was, and it took me years to figure that out, because I was so used to an environment where you could lead people, right? And you could lead
Right.
them a certain way. And and what happened was, in the beginning, I tried to lead in kind of what I thought was a West Point way, and tried to sort of instill an esprit de corps and all that stuff. But what I found was, and this was unfortunate, and this was one of the reasons I eventually kind of left the business in 2018, um, was that I found that only fear worked. And and in order for me to manage 100 people who were all paid on commission, who all fought over every penny, literally, the only way that I found that I could run that organization was through fear. And it's a terrible way to have to run, because it's just, to me, it's like the last thing I want to do is have to have people around me walking on eggshells. But if they weren't, then I just lost complete control. And they were, and again, this isn't the right way to think about it, but the way that I thought about it was, fear maintains the order of things, and there's sharks everywhere around me, and that the only way that I'm going to be able to keep control of them is to do that. And it was such an extreme that, there's a movie, Gangs of New York, and there's an unbelievable scene where Daniel Day-Lewis is explaining to Leo DiCaprio how he's ruled the 5 points for all those years. And he gives this big speech about how fear maintains the order of things. I had a portrait made of Daniel Day-Lewis in that scene with an American flag wrapped around his shoulders, and that was up in my office. It was that
Wow.
and the West Point diploma. And that was just my reminder to myself that if I don't keep these guys afraid, then they're going to try to take advantage of every sign of weakness that I show. And that's kind of what Wall Street became for me. And that's where, as I was writing the book and experiencing this new way of thinking, it just completely didn't work with what I was trying to do, managing the office.
So Ian, help me and all our listeners dig out of this hole that you all of a sudden got us in, because here we are, we're in a leadership podcast. I'm a bit of a purist, I'm like, leadership is a universal trait that's thousands of years old. It's just a matter of executing on it. It's about human connection, all of those things, very team orientated. My entire life has been around a team. I suspect a majority of the people that are listening are around the team. And now all of a sudden, we're sitting here listening, and you talk to about having to rule with fear when you get to a very, animalistic, individualistic kind of dog eat dog scenario. How do we take pure leadership things, some very human connection perspectives, the individual universes that you talk about, and how do we lead in that situation? Now, I know you left Wall Street, but when you're in a situation like that, let's say we have people that are running an all commission sales team right now that are listening to us today. How do you lead when you know that it's that primal in a way? How do you create that connection one on one?
Well, I think the biggest way to create the connection is actually to take the time to make the connection. And that's often what I did not do. And I didn't do it because I had convinced myself wrongly that because I fired people and hired people completely unemotionally and was actually brought into different firms specifically for that trait,
Huh.
specifically as firms, the last firm I joined, they brought me there to fix it, to fix the problem. And I did. But I did it in a way that took no account for the individuals. All I
Mm,
focused on was bottom line, this
the
is what needs
results.
to happen. That's it. So if I were managing a team of commissioned salesperson at this point, um, I would get to know each one a lot more. I would actually spend time to figure out what is it that motivates them. And if I learn what motivates them, if I understand their universe just a little bit by asking questions, then I can fine tune the way that I deal with everyone. And the world's changed. And those who can adapt and have success. Those who can't, do not. And so for me, the biggest adaptation has been I've got to stop thinking that, this is a Shark Tank, and just say, okay, well, hold on a second. I've got 10 different people. They're all completely different from completely different universes. Why don't I get a chance to spend time with them and see what makes them tick? Understand the pressures they're under, understand where I can be helpful. And so that process is a lot more work than just saying this is the way it is. But it's a process that ultimately, I think, can actually build some of that esprit de corps and find ways to get people so that, there's not this sort of schadenfreude that takes place where it's a zero sum game. If one salesperson's doing well, that means somebody else isn't. And
Mm.
one gets rewarded, the other one gets let go. And so to be able to change that mindset by getting to know each person, that's the challenge. But that's the reward. And as I look back and as sort of the things that I do, I like to highlight my failures because I think that that's the real learning point. But when I have been successful, it's been because the people that were following me or working for me would follow me up the hill. They believed in what we were doing. I was able to convince them that this greater goal here, this is what we want, and we can do it together. That is sort of the way that I would kind of try to connect those two.
Yeah, it's really interesting. As you were talking, I was thinking about, many people get wrapped up in following the word from a leadership perspective, diversity, right? And they're chasing diversity. They're chasing and it's the big diversity, meaning, you got to have, it's the diversity of thought, diversity experiences, all of those kind of things. But when you view the world through your lens, diversity is a naturally occurring thing because each individual is their own universe, and they come with their own set of education, training, and experiences that you end up valuing no matter what.
Yeah. I mean, like, clearly there's, diversity, which is obvious, right? As far as the way people look or how they sound. But then there's the much more subtle diversity that is actually much more interesting because you're actually getting to know each person. And while, it's like I tell people, even your most intimate relationships, your family, your wife, whatever it is, like you probably only know a very little bit about why they think what they think, or why a certain thing bothers them, right? It could be something from 25 years ago. And so each person, is so different that's where, the diversity in and of itself is to me, it's inherent. But it requires the actual sort of curiosity to learn about each person to just kind of prove that point as to how diverse they are.
You're right. And that's not, it goes back to being uncomfortable, because I think there are some people that are people, persons, right? They're extroverts. They have no problem coming up to somebody and tell me about your life, tell me about your wife or your husband and things like that. But I would argue that probably well over half of the people are leaning towards an introvert, or have grown up to kind of mind your own business in a way. So it's a tough request from a leader's perspective to go to a subordinate and say, you know how was your weekend, tell me what you did, talk to me about your parents, things like that. It's a difficult thing to get used to.
It is. And they're, it's a process, and it's a feeling out process. Um, but to me, and look, a lot of it, the world's, a lot of it's generated. I mean, the world's changed. The things that
Yeah.
motivated me are not necessarily going to motivate other people. And so, I'd rather take the time and the risk to get to know people a little bit. And if I find out that they're introverted, well, that's just one more thing that helps with the way I may manage.
That's right. Have you found that you have become ultra conscious of the makeup of your team now? Are you aware of, wow, maybe I have too many people that think a certain way and I don't have enough that, I guess it goes back to the diversity argument in a way, right? Do I have a well-rounded team now that I know them so well? I mean, is this in a pure way a technique to make sure you have a team that is diverse by getting to know them at such a deep level? But or is it the fact that your argument is, by knowing somebody at such a deep level, there really is no two people alike, and that you just can exploit the fact that we are all different, even if we think in generalities we all think alike?
Yeah, I mean, I think that clearly there's some higher level beliefs on things that you can get into groupthink real fast. And so one of the things that to me is incredibly important is getting to know everybody and finding out sort of where those difference in thought are. Um, but it's also having the ability to bring on people who are going to, have different opinions on things and different styles. And
Yep.
it's hard because it's easy to just load the bench with people who, yeah, they're clearly different, but they're not going to question. They just have a different kind of approach. For me, now that I'm willing to take the time to figure it out and ask questions, in an interview process, I'm very interested in sort of kind of, is this person somebody who's going to actually challenge my own belief system? And if they are, fantastic. Because, it's just, I've seen it time and time and time again where, and, people have been talking about groupthink for decades, and yet it still happens all the time in organizations. And for me, it's mostly because the leader isn't willing to ask people real questions and actually listen to the answers, and instead sort of dictates it, and everybody, either out of fear or compliance or whatever it is, just kind of goes along with it. And this is why decisions are, companies and people make terrible decisions and avoidable decisions all the time. And so it's bringing people to the table that are going to actually challenge your beliefs. And I think, from my experience, like West Point and military type leaders are great leaders in general. But if there's one thing that I've noticed time and time again, it's that there's a difficulty with a lot of people who are used to that kind of formal rank structure and formal mission oriented structure to appreciate the diversity that can come from somebody who doesn't think that way at all. And
Totally agree. I think the one of the signs of a truly high performing organization is leaders that embrace the devil's advocate. Leaders that are extremely comfortable making sure that their team is filled with people that are unafraid to question. That's the sign of a high performing, or most high performing organizations have that type of a culture to them. There's no doubt about it.
yeah,
And you're right.
and it,
I've seen that too, Ian. That like in a military environment, especially if you come from leadership from a military environment, they're used to that command and control, hierarchical kind of scenario, and it's tough. They are not ever used. They grew up leading well, but being practically unquestioned.
right.
That's
And
dangerous.
and the world, it was one thing when even in my class, right? So I graduated in 1996. If I look at most of the people who graduated from, West Point around that time, many of them wound up in some kind of pharmaceutical sales or a mid-level management job at General Electric or Pfizer, right? And so that at least you could sense the military. There was a military kind of structure to that. It wasn't the same, but there was a structure. Look at companies today and the world we're in today, and that sort of role. If it exists, it's nothing like it was, and it's
Absolutely.
a fraction of what it was. And so now, as a military leader, you've really got to be so flexible that it's almost like a lot of the places you work are much more like a special ops type group with less concern about rank than sort of this traditional Six Sigma, Jack Welch GE thing, which to me just doesn't really exist anymore.
That's very true. The organizations are almost flat in hierarchy now, and that's exactly. It was funny when you were saying that. I was thinking exactly the same thing. It's a lot of the special operation leaders have been succeeding in the last 15 years or so more than the large military enterprise leaders, for the fact that they are used to a flattened organization, low ranking individuals or lower experienced individuals having the free ability to question things and empowerment and all of those kind of things. It is a very interesting dynamic. There's no doubt. So Ian, we're making this recording during, we're still in the midst of the COVID pandemic. We're starting to come down from it, but basically the world, and let's just say the United States right now, for the last 6 to 8 weeks, has been at a complete standstill. Everybody's been at home. They've been shaped by what they hear on the TV and on radio. Definitely, locked down within their own family cultures or their friend cultures. And, I kind of want to get back to, how we started the conversation about perspective. What are some of your thoughts now about the perspective moving forward from a human race kind of scenario? What do you think's important as we all start to maybe get back to work? How there's probably used fear in a different context, but there's probably high fear. There's probably anxiety. I would argue that in general, the American public's resilience is relatively low at this point. So what are your some suggestions as you start to talk and interact with your fellow human beings coming out of such an environment that we are in right now during the pandemic?
So I think that the most important thing, and I part of it's for my job now, but I spend most of my time on the phone talking to people.
Hmm.
Um, to me, there's such value in having conversation as opposed to text or email or anything else, because I do feel that you're able to connect on a different level, even though it's not face to face. But I think it's that much more important to understand and ask people why, why they're so anxious. What is it? And not to question like, why are you anxious? You shouldn't be, but like, okay, so what do you think? What's
Hmm.
going on? What are your, let's talk about it. Cause and I'm scared. I don't know what's going on. It feels totally surreal to me. I don't know how things are going to be going forward. And I think the key now is it's that much more important to actually ask people how they're doing and listen. We're so conditioned to give the "How you doing? Great." Um,
Right.
well, now people aren't doing so great, and so I think if it requires effort, but I think that there's an opportunity, and it can start right now, where you get on the phone with somebody you haven't talked to in a while. You get on your phone and you say, "How are you?" And you actually have a conversation and listen. And it's amazing what one can learn from a 20 or 30-minute conversation. And I always try to bring it back to business as well, because I know that's so important to people. The more I talk to people, the more I learn, the more connections I form, the more people want to help in whatever it is that we're trying to accomplish. And because of that, that's the key. I could sit here and text people all day long, but that's not going to ever get me to the next level of connection with a person. And so that's why now I find like get on the phone, get on Zoom, get on FaceTime, and pick up the phone, because it's amazing what it means to people when you call them and they
Have you
really.
found Have you found what do you think is that great connector in conversation? You gave the example of kind of the classic tee up, how you doing? Right? That just allows somebody to kind of give a lazy answer back. Do you just keep probing? Have you found like a great way to kind of start that true conversation to get somebody to take that step back or lower their defenses and really relate to you?
Yeah, what I do a lot of times is I ask how they're doing, and then I'll ask how they're really doing.
Nice.
And that to me is sort of the key difference. And asking about people's family, and when they tell you about them, remembering, so that the next time you talk to them,
Hmm.
you remember their kids and their wife and their names. And you start to form a bond with a person that 20, 30 days later you can get on the phone with them again. And again, I know how important business is for people, but it's like I tell people, if you're in constant dialogue with people, and I mean by constant, I mean you talk to them a few times, once a quarter, twice a quarter, you need a favor from them
Ha.
or an introduction, it's a lot easier to make that request than it is for somebody you haven't talked to in 10 years and you hit up on LinkedIn and say, hey, how you doing? It looks like you know this person. Like to me, I recently took my LinkedIn connections. I was at 3,600 and I didn't even know
Hmm.
who anybody was. And I've cut them down to 725 and basically said, if I haven't talked to you in a certain period of time, I'm I'm ending the connection. And
Ha.
hopefully, when people come back into me, I'm setting up calls with people, because what I want is a real connection. I want to know how you're doing. I want to tell you how I'm doing. And I want to know that going further, I'm willing to help you, and hopefully you're willing to help me. And to me, that's a connection. It's not just two people who, click a button.
Yeah, Ian, That's a pretty powerful statement that you just said. That's an aha moment because it isn't about how many friends you have or connections that you have and all that stuff. Because the more you have and the more disconnected, it actually showcases how weak that universe is. But rather, if you have a lower amount of connections to where you are truly connected to them, that's power and strength in a truism to that. That's a pretty big aha moment for sure. Because I'm exactly like that. There, I will guarantee you that half of the people that are on my connections, I really have no connection to.
That's right. And so for me, that's my big advice to people this year is
Yeah,
people, 'cause
that's
people
powerful.
ask, what do you think? And I say, go into your LinkedIn because look at it from the other person's perspective. If somebody asks me, hey, you're connected to the CEO of whatever, can you help me with an introduction? And I say, oh, I don't even know who they are. I mean, to me, that's a joke. And so
Yeah,
why not just say, okay, this way, if somebody sees I'm connected or I'm connected to, vice versa, I know it's a legitimate connection and then I can actually pick up the phone. And what I've done with everybody who I am still connected with is like, oh, if I haven't talked to them in a while, I'll hit them up and set up a call. Because otherwise, it's just like this crazy exercise we get into where, it's like the more the better, as opposed to the quality.
yeah, it just feeds the ego where it defeats the entire intent of true connection, the word connection, and everything we've talked about today.
Yeah,
No doubt.
pretty much.
Crazy. Well, Ian, I can tell you, I myself have written a page and a half of notes just off of this 45-minute conversation because it's another wake up call to try to be, it's about being authentic. It's about being a real leader, a real person, a real follower. You can't be any of these things for real unless you make that connection. And I will tell you, you have caused us to gain a greater sense of purpose in life through this connection to other people. There is no doubt, I think all of us will think in our heads. Probably the first thing we'll think in our heads, is about you picking your nose at the stoplight and
Exactly.
how that switches everything in the perspective of life and how we need to connect more with people. And Ian, thanks again for your time. This has been a powerful conversation that I know that we will all take a lot of notes out of today. So thanks again.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for joining our leadership movement this week, talking to Ian about being in control of your life and to question everything. And of course, never be quick to judge. Don't forget our show notes are posted on the website with key leader takeaways and suggested action plans. Be sure to subscribe and join our Facebook group to get even more behind the scenes action. Until next time, remember that iron sharpens iron. Make yourself and others around you better every single day.